Good evening, my gentle listeners. It's wonderful to be back. It's been a terribly long time, I'm afraid. A terribly long time indeed. However, Restless Readings has returned and hopefully is here to stay. Without further ado, we love to bring you Restless Readings, Episode 3. Oh, my dear guest. It's time to wake up. What is it? Where am I? Oh, God, I'm still in this hellscape. I thought it would just be a dream. Why wasn't it just a dream? What do you want? Oh, don't be like that, Jason. It's merely time for us to go get breakfast. I believe Reginald hunted something for you outside. Come upstairs, come upstairs. It's probably done cooking already. Oh, God. Oh, dear Mother of God, I'll be there in a second. Don't let it wait. You wouldn't want poor Reginald to feel bad, would you? No, I wouldn't. Okay, I'll be there in a minute. Be there in just a minute. Good. Don't keep the devil waiting. Okay, I'm still in this hellscape. I haven't escaped yet. How do I escape? Can I escape? Crap. Like, God damn it, my leg's still broken. Okay. Guess I have no choice. I'll do what he says. It's light out. So maybe the storm will pass soon? I'll just have to see. Oh, hurry. Reginald was just getting finished setting up the table. He won't be eating with us, don't worry. I apologize, Reginald, but you are far too grotesque for anybody at the table. Exactly. Goodbye. Reginald. Always the creepiest of them, isn't he? Look, Mr. Tomekeeper, was it? Wow, you're really good at that standing in shadow stuff. Standing? Never mind. Just... No, I can't let a guest out in conditions like this. That rain is lethal. But oh, sit back and eat. You haven't even uncovered your plate yet. Oh God, is that? Oh, it's nothing more than just some rabbit. It's fine, perfectly edible. It's still got fur on it. Ah, nonsense. The fur merely enriches the flavor. I think I'm. Eat. Okay. Bit chewy. Oh, that's to be expected. Tell you what. While you do that, why don't I read you a new story? I happen to have some good ideas. That really isn't necessary. Nonsense. Now sit down, relax, just enjoy your meal. Whilst I begin reading. The first story in tonight's collections comes from the author Arthur Make. Specifically, it's the story known as Out of the Earth. Let's get started, shall we? There was some sort of confused complaint during last August of the ill behavior of the children at certain Welsh watering places. Such reports and vague rumors are most difficult to trace to their heads and fountains. None has better reason to know than myself. I need not go over the old ground here, but I am afraid that many people are wishing by this time that they had never heard my name. Again, a considerable number of estimable persons are concerning themselves, gloomily enough from my point of view, with my everlasting welfare. They write me letters in some kindly remonstrance, begin begging me not to deprive poor, sick-hearted souls of what little comfort they possess amidst their sorrows. Others send me tracts and pink leaflets with allusions to the daughter of a well-known canon. Others, again, are violently and anonymously abusive. And then, in open print, in fair book from Mr. Begbie, has dealt me with righteously but harshly, as I cannot but think. Yet it was also entirely innocent, nay casual on my part. A poor Linnaea of prose, I did but perform my indifferent piping in the evening news because I wanted to do so, because I felt that the story of the bowman ought to be told. An inventor of fantasies is a poor creature, heaven knows, when all the world is at war, but I thought that no harm would be done. At any rate, if I bore witness, after the fashion of the fantastic craft, to my belief in the heroic glory of the English host who went back from Mons, fighting and triumphing, then somehow or other, it was as if I had touched a button and set in action a terrific, complicated mechanism of rumors that pretended to be sworn truth, of gossip that posed as evidence, of wild taradiddles that good men most firmly believed. The supposed testimony of that daughter of a well-known canon took parish magazines by storm, and equally enjoyed the faith of dissenting divines. The daughter denied all knowledge of the matter, but people still quoted her, supposed sure would, and the issues were confused with tales, probably true, of painful hallucinations and deliriums of our retreating soldiers, men fatigued and shattered to the very verge of death. It all became worse than the Russian myths, and as in the fable of the Russians, it seemed impossible to follow the streams of delusion to their fountainhead, or heads. Who was it that said Miss M knew two officers who, etc., etc.? I suppose we shall never know his lying, deluding name. And so, I dare say, it'll be with this strange affair of the troublesome children of the Welsh seaside town, or rather a group of small towns and villages lying within a certain section or zone, which I am not going to indicate more precisely than I can help, since I love that country, and my recent experience with the bowmen have taught me that no tale is too idle to be believed. And of course, to begin with, nobody knew how this odd and malicious piece of gossip originated. So far as I know, it was more akin to the Russian myth than to the tale of the Angels of Mons. That is, rumor preceded print. The thing was talked of here and there, and passed from letter to letter long before the papers were aware of its existence. And here it resembles the Mons affair. London and Manchester, Leeds and Birmingham were muttering vague, unpleasant things, while the little villages concerned basked innocently in the sunshine of an unusual prosperity. In this last circumstance, as some believe, is to be sought the root of the whole matter. It is well known that certain East Coast towns suffered from the dread of air raids, and that a good many of their usual visitors went westward for the first time. So there's a theory that the East Coast was mean enough to circulate reports against the West Coast out of pure malice and envy. It may be so. I do not pretend to know, but here is a personal experience, such as it is, which illustrated the way in which the rumor was circulated. I was lunching one day at Fleet Street Tavern. This was early in July, and a friend of mine, a solicitor of Sarantin, came and sat at the same table. We began to talk of holidays, and my friend Edith asked me where I was going. To the same old place, I said. Manavon. You know, we always go there. Are you really? Said the lawyer. I thought that coast had gone off a lot. My wife has a friend who's heard that it's not all that it was. I was astonished to hear this, not seeing how a little village like Manavon could have gone off. I had known it for 10 years as having accommodation for about 20 visitors, and I could not believe that rows of lodging houses had sprung up since the August of 1914. Still, I put the question to Edith. Trippers? I asked, knowing firstly that trippers hate the solitude of the country and the sea. Secondly, that there are no industrial towns within cheap and easy distance. And thirdly, that the railways were issuing no excursion tickets during the war. Not exactly trippers, the lawyer said, but my wife's friend knows a clergyman who says that at the beach at Treman is not at all pleasant now. And Treman's only a few miles from Manavon, isn't it? In what way not pleasant? I carried on my examination. Pierrots and shows and that sort of thing. I felt that it could not be so, for the solemn rocks of Treman would have turned the liveliest Pierrot to stone. He would have frozen into a crag on the beach, and the seagulls would carry away his song and make it a lament by lonely, booming caverns that look on Avalon. Edith said he had heard nothing about showmen, but he understood that since the war, the children of the whole district had gone quite out of hand. Bad language, you know, he said, and all that sort of thing. Worse than London slum children. One doesn't want wife and children to hear foul talk at any time, much less on their holiday. No, no, much less on their holiday. And they say that Castle Coach is quite impossible. No decent woman should be seen there. I said, really? That's a great pity. And changed the subject. But I could not make it out at all. I knew Castle Koch well, a little bay bastioned by dunes and red sandstone cliffs with rich greenery, but stream of cold water runs down there to the sea. There is the ruined Norman castle and the ancient church and the scattered village. It's altogether a place of peace and quiet and great beauty. The people there, children and grown-ups alike, were not merely decent but courteous folk. If one thanked a child for opening a gate, there would come the inevitable response, "And welcome kindly, sir." I could not make it out at all. I didn't believe the lawyer's tales for the life of me. I could not see what could be driving at, and for the avoidance of all unnecessary mystery, I may as well say that my wife and child myself went down to Manavan last August and had a most delightful holiday. At the time, we were certainly conscious of no annoyance or unpleasantness of any kind. Afterwards, I confess I heard a story that puzzled and still puzzles me. This story, if it be received, might give its own interpretation to one or two circumstances which seemed in themselves quite insignificant. But all through July, I came upon traces of evil rumors affecting this most gracious corner of the earth. Some of these rumors were repetitions of Edith's gossip. Others amplified his vague story and made it more definite. Of course, no first-hand evidence was available. There never is any first-hand evidence in these cases. But A knew B, who heard from C that her young sister's second cousin, blah, blah, blah. Then people quoted a doctor in large practice in a well-known town in the Midlands to the effect that Trayman was a sink of juvenile depravity. They said the responsible medical man's evidence was final and convincing, but they didn't bother to find out who the doctor was, or whether there was any doctor at all, or any doctor relevant to the issue. The thing began to get into the papers in a sort of oblique, by the way sort of manner. People cited the case of these imaginary bad children in support of their educational views. One side said that these unfortunate little ones would have been quite well behaved if they had no education at all. The opposition declared that continuation schools would speedily reform them and make them into admirable citizens. Then the poor Afronshire children seemed to become involved in quarrels about Welsh disestablishment and the question of the minors, and all the while they were going about behaving politely and admirably, as they always do. I knew all the time that it was all nonsense, but I couldn't understand the least what it meant, or who was pulling the wires of rumor, or the purpose in so pulling. I began to wonder whether the pressure and anxiety and suspense of a terrible war had unhinged the public mind so that it was ready to believe any fable to debate the reasons for happenings which had never happened. At last, quite incredible things began to be whispered. Visitors. Children had not only been beaten, they had been tortured. A little boy had been found impaled on a stake in a lonely field near Manavan. Another child had been lured to destruction over the cliffs at Castle Coach. A London paper sent a good man down quietly to our front to investigate. He was away for a week, and at the end of that period returned to his office in his own phrase, threw the whole story down. There was not a word of truth, he said, in any of these rumors. No vestige of a foundation for the mildest forms of all this gossip. He had never seen such a beautiful country. He had never met pleasanter men, women, or children. There was not a single case of anyone having been annoyed or troubled in any sort of fashion. Yet all the while the story grew and grew more monstrous and incredible. I was much too occupied in watching the progress of my own mythological monster to pay much attention. The town clerk of Tremen, to which the legend had at length penetrated, wrote a brief letter to the press indignantly denying that there was the slightest foundation for the unsavory rumors which he understood were being circulated. At about this time we went down to Manavon, and, as I say, enjoyed ourselves extremely. The weather was perfect, blues of paradise in the sky, the seas all a shimmering wonder, olive greens and emeralds, rich purples, glassy sapphires, changing by the rocks. Far away, a haze of magic lights and colors at the meeting of the sea and sky. Work and anxiety had harried me. I thought nothing better than to rest on the thyme banks of the shore, finding an infinite balm and refreshment in the great sea before me, and the tiny flowers beside me. Or we would rest all the summer afternoon on a shelf high on the gray cliffs, and watch the tide creaming and surging about the rocks, and listening to it booming in the hollows of the caverns below. Afterwards, as I say, there were one or two things that struck cold, but at the time, those were nothing. You see a man in an odd white hat pass by, and think little or nothing of it. Afterwards, when you hear that a man wearing just such a hat had committed murder in the next street 5 minutes before, then you find that hat a certain interest and significance. Funny children was the phrase my little boys used, and I began to think they were funny indeed. If there be a key to all this queer business, I think it is to be found in a talk I had not long ago with a friend of mine named Morgan. He is a Welshman and a dreamer, and some people say he is like a child who has grown up, and yet has not grown up like the other children of men. Though I did not know it while I was at Manavon, he was spending his holiday time at Castle Coach. He was a lovely man, and he liked lonely places. When we met in the autumn, he told me how, day after day, he would carry his bread and cheese and beer in a basket to a remote headland on that coast, known as the Old Camp. Here, far above the waters, are solemn mighty walls, turf-grown circumvallations, rounded and smooth, was the passing of many thousand years. At one end of this most ancient place, there is a tumulus, a tower of observation, perhaps, and underneath it slinks the green, deceiving ditch that seems to wind into the heart of the camp, but in reality rushes down to sheer rock and precipice over the waters. Here came Morgan daily, as he said, to dream of Avalon, to purge himself from the fuming corruption of the streets. And so, as he told me, it was with singular horror that one afternoon, as he dozed and dreamed and opened his eyes now and again to watch the miracle and magic of the sea, as he listened to the myriad of murmurs of the waves, his meditation was broken by a sudden burst of horrible raucous cries, the cries of children, too, but children of the lowest type. Morgan says that the very tones made him shudder. They were to the ear what slime is to the touch. And then the words, every foulness, every filthy abomination of speech, blasphemies that struck like blows at the sky, that sank down into the pure, shining depths defining them. He was amazed. He peered over the green wall of the fort, and there in the ditch he saw a swarm of noisome children, horrible little stunted creature with old men's faces, with bloated faces, with little sunken eyes, with leering eyes. It was worse than uncovering a brood of snakes or a nest of worms. No, he would not describe what they were about. Right about Belgium, said Morgan, and I think they could have been more than 5 or 6 years old. There was no infirmary, he said, that they did not perpetrate. They spared no horror of cruelty. I saw blood running in streams as they shrieked with laughter, but he could not find the mark of it on the grass afterwards. Morgan said he watched them and could not utter a word. It was as if a hand held his mouth tight, but at last he found his voice and shrieked at them. They burst into a yell of obscene laughter and shrieked back at him and scattered out of sight. He could not trace them. He supposes that they hid in the deep bracken behind the old camp. Sometimes I can't understand my landlord at Castle Coach, Morgan went on. He's the village postmaster and has a little farm of his own, a decent, pleasant, ordinary sort of chap. But now and again he will talk oddly. I was telling him about these beastly children, wondering who they could be when he broke into Welsh. Something like the battle that is for age unto ages, and the people take delight in it. So far, Morgan, and it was evident that he did not understand at all. But this strange tale of his brought back an odd circumstance or two that I recollected. A matter of our little boy straying away more than once and getting lost among the sand dunes, coming back screaming, evidently frightened horribly and babbling about funny children. We took no notice, didn't trouble, I think, to look whether there were any children wandering about the dunes or not. We were not accustomed to his small imaginations. But after hearing Morgan's story, I was interested, and I wrote an account of that matter to my friend, old Dr. Dothwaite of Hereford, and They were only visible, only audible, to children and the childlike, hence the explanation of what puzzled you at first. The rumors, how did they arise? They arose from nursery gossip, from scraps and odds and ends of half-articulate children's talk, of horrors they didn't understand, of words that ashamed their nurses and their mothers. These little people of the earth rise up and rejoice in these times of ours, for they are glad, as the Welshman said, when they know that men follow their ways. Oh, my dear captive audience, I hope that first story was entertaining for you. Yep. Terribly entertaining. Good. I wouldn't want to bore my poor fellow, now would I? I suppose not. No, of course not. Why on earth would I ever want to regale you with something less than the absolute best I could offer? Okay. Now, of course, this is far from finished. What? Oh no, my friend, just keep eating. Wait, I think the rain might have stopped. You were saying? Oh, okay. The rain won't stop for another couple days. Trust me. It doesn't stop that fast around here. I understand. Okay. Now, allow me to regale you with the next tale. For the next tale that we have in store is a short story created by someone going by the name Horror Queen 1212. We ought to get started with the reading, shouldn't we? It was all a lie. The rays of the sun danced beautifully upon the horizon, blinding anyone who looked straight into them. Beneath them was a vast sea of grass that seemed to go on forever. Panning upwards, one would see the beautiful figure of a barn owl gracefully soaring and dipping through the sky. Far in the distance, the silhouette of a person emerged from the great plain. The owl soared straight for the figure, as if it was excitedly returning home. Closer and closer it flew, until the figure could be made out. The figure was that of a woman. She was beautiful, with almond skin, the long black hair tied up in a ponytail. She had the warmest brown eyes one could ever imagine. She looked as if she was made to be dressed in fine clothes, but instead she wore a sensible waitress's uniform, complete with an apron. She put her right arm out in front of her, bent so her hand was parallel to her left shoulder. The owl gently landed upon her arm. It was facing her, leaving its face out of view. The woman smiled gently and stroked its feathers. She caressed the large bird as if it were her child. It was a moment of peace. Suddenly, the owl's head snapped around. One of its eyes looked forward, as if to pierce the soul, but the other eye was disturbingly stitched closed. Kelsey awoke abruptly, the alarm clock echoing off the walls of her dorm room. Somehow, her best friend, Sam, stayed asleep in the twin bed next to hers. Kelsey had had that dream every night since she was a little girl. She had tried many times to decipher its meaning. She had no idea what the owl was doing in the dream, but she was guessing that the woman was her brain's painted picture of her biological mother. You see, Kelsey had been adopted as a baby. It was a closed adoption, so she had no information about who her birth parents were or why they decided to give her up. Thankfully, she had been adopted by two loving, supportive parents. Her parents, Martha and Fred Hughes, lived in a small rural town on the outskirts of a large native reservation. They had dealt with infertility for many years before searching out an alternative option to have a child. They had always treated her as their own, but there was no denying that she was adopted. While her parents had light complexion, Kelsey had olive skin and silky black hair. Her eyes were deep chocolate brown. She was often confused as being one of the natives, but it was more likely that she was Latina because her parents had gotten her from a foster home in Los Angeles. Kelsey loved her parents, and her parents loved Kelsey. She was their everything. They had never missed a school play, softball game, or anything else in which she was involved. The refrigerator was covered in Kelsey's messy childhood artwork. They had made sure that she had the perfect childhood. Well, almost. You see, Fred and Martha Hughes had their eccentricities. They had what was lovingly called the filling system. The filling system consisted of a huge accumulation of unmarked cardboard boxes, filing nearly the entire space of the basement. All important paperwork, pictures, and memorabilia were all somewhere in those 50-plus boxes. Kelsey's mother claimed to know exactly where everything was in the very special system, but it was obvious that was not true. Case in point, Kelsey had wanted to see her adoption papers for years, but they were lost somewhere in the giant mess of boxes. Her parents seemed very embarrassed that they didn't know their location, so Kelsey had let it go to spare their feelings. Unfortunately, she really needed those papers now. She was a full-time student at the University of Colorado Boulder, and her full-time job was barely sustaining her living expenses. She had gotten a partial scholarship, but the rest of her tuition and fees she needed to pay through other scholarships. She had recently found a very lucrative one for adopted students that she knew she qualified for. The only problem was that she needed to send a copy of her adoption papers in order to apply. She wasn't too worried though. Sam had come up with an idea to finally find those papers without embarrassing her folks. Speaking of Sam, she was finally waking up on the bed beside hers. Sam was a native from the reservation. They had met when they were just 16 at Jenny's diner. They both worked there for their after-school jobs. They were both thankful for that old diner. Without it, they would have never met each other, since they both went to different high schools. Sam sat up in bed, giving Kelsey a look. You have that dream again? She asked. Yeah, Kelsey repeated tiredly. I was talking with my grandfather about it, Sam said. He says that owls represent wisdom, and that if you're seeing one in your dreams, it means you're very wise. What about a one-eyed owl? Asked Kelsey. Truthfully, she didn't believe much of what Sam's superstitious grandfather thought. He was an easily frightened man who never left the reservation, and therefore had a pretty limited view of the world. He especially didn't like Sam leaving the reservation, as indigenous women around the country often went missing without the law or news stations paying much mind. I forgot to tell him that part, Sam said sheepishly. Kelsey shrugged and threw her covers off as both girls got ready for the day. Today they were implementing Sam's plan to help Kelsey. They were calling it Operation Get Those Freaking Adoption Papers. The plan was simple. Kelsey's parents had never had a honeymoon, so the girls had convinced them to stop hoarding their money and take a long overdue trip to Hawaii. Finals had just wrapped up, so the girls could spend the whole week the couple was gone searching through the boxes without Kelsey's parents ever knowing. She could get the parents to apply for her scholarship. If she could get the papers to apply for her scholarship, and her parents wouldn't need to be embarrassed. It was a win-win situation. They packed up and drove back to the little town. The drive was about 4 hours long, so they had left pretty early that morning. They stopped at Jenny's diner for lunch before arriving at Kelsey's house. When they arrived at the house, they let themselves in with Kelsey's spare key. They put their things in Kelsey's room before heading down to the basement, looking over the piles of boxes. Kelsey couldn't help but be thankful to have a friend who would spend a week with her in this dusty basement. They started the slow and tedious process of going through the boxes. The first day they found nothing. They spent all the next day looking, but again found nothing. It wasn't until the third day that they found something. It just wasn't the something they were looking for. It was Sam who found it. She had gasped, alerting Kelsey to the fact that something was wrong. Sam was shaken. As if afraid to move too quickly, Sam slowly handed Kelsey a clear plastic parcel. Inside was a floral dress and white shoes taped to the front of the parcel. It was a missing persons poster. A picture of a native woman in her early 20s smiled up at her. According to the poster, her name was Ashley Navarro, and she had gone missing almost 30 years prior. She was last seen in a floral dress and ivory shoes. Sam's voice broke Kelsey from her dazed thoughts. Why would your parents have that? She asked in a disturbed voice. I don't know, was all Kelsey could say. We have to call the police, Ashley said quietly yet forcefully. Tears pooled in Kelsey's eyes. Fear and confusion were overtaking her. She took a deep breath. You do it, she said. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was betraying her parents, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. I'm so glad you're here, Kelsey continued. Why? Asked Sam. Because I don't think I could make that call, Kelsey said tearfully. Sam embraced her as she began to cry in earnest. Within 24 hours, police had removed all the boxes from the basement. Once they were gone, it was clear that they had been hiding something underneath them. Shallow graves. 12. 12 bodies had been excavated from Kelsey's basement. All of the bodies belonged to missing Native women. Martha and Fred Hughes were serial killers. Kelsey's parents were arrested and escorted back to their little town. News outlets swarmed the place like flies. People were calling it the ever-evolving case, the Native Nightmare. And Kelsey's house was being called a true house of horrors. Kelsey was staying with Sam's family, trying to hide from the media circus. About 1 week after the police had been contacted, a detective called Kelsey down to the station. She was told that it was important she heard a piece of her father's confession. The detective was treating her very delicately as he led her into a room with a television in it. She sat in that small room and watched the video of her father being interrogated by the same detective that had treated her so kindly. She barely recognized the man on the tape as her father, the usually proud, well-put-together man with that charming smile, was gone. In his place was a disheveled man, hunched over with large bags under his emotionless eyes. A picture of a woman was shown to the camera. Kelsey's world started to spin. The picture was of a beautiful woman with almond skin, long black hair, and the warmest brown eyes one could imagine. It was the woman from Kelsey's dream. The picture was moved away from the camera and placed directly in front of her father. "Do you remember this woman?" barked the detective from the tape. For a moment, Kelsey thought the question was aimed at her. "Yes," her father said emotionally. "That's Kimberly Green." "Yes," the detective said. "Miss Green was last seen at a friend's house shortly after working her shift at Jenny's diner. How did you come in contact with her that night?" She was hitchhiking back home. Martha and I picked her up," Fred said. "What did you do to Miss Green?" the detective asked. "Stabbed her," he calmly replied. "One last question," the detective continued. "Miss Green had picked up her 2-month-old daughter, Jessica, from her friend's house that night. What did you do with the baby?" For the first time, Fred got emotional. He let out a small sob before trying to compose himself. After a moment, he took a deep breath and said, "Renamed her Kelsey." It was 2 months later, and Kelsey had reunited with her family on the reservation. She was in therapy, trying to wrap her head around the fact that her parents had killed her mother. She was taking a semester off from school to work on herself. She still had that dream, but it was different now. The rays of the sun danced beautifully upon the horizon, blinding anyone who looked straight into them. Beneath them was a vast sea of grass that seemed to go on forever. Panning upwards, one would see the beautiful figure of a barn owl, gracefully soaring and dipping through the sky. Far in the distance, the silhouette of a person emerged from the great plain. The owl soared straight for the figure, as if it was excitedly returning home. Closer and closer it flew, until the figure could be made out. The figure was that of a woman. She was beautiful, with almond skin and long black hair tied up in a ponytail. She had the warmest brown eyes one could ever imagine. She wore a sensible waitress's uniform, complete with an apron. She put her right arm out in front of her, bent so her hand was parallel to her left shoulder. The owl gently landed upon her arm. It was facing her, leaving its face out of view. The woman smiled gently and stroked its feathers. She caressed the large bird as if it were her child. There was a moment of peace. Suddenly, the owl's head snapped around. It stared straight ahead with two large open eyes. And that, my dear friend, would be the end of Restless Readings for this lunch period. So how do you feel, Jason? Great, great. Rabbit sitting comfortably. Did I say rabbit? I'm not really sure what that was. I assumed it was rabbit. You don't know what that was? No, I'm afraid not. It was probably rabbit. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to, do you have a bathroom I could maybe use? I believe there should be one adjacent to your room. Thank you. I'll be a while. Well, there he goes. You can't get good help sometimes. Even worse, sometimes you simply can't get good food. Regardless, I'll have to sit down at this table again soon enough. Or if he doesn't, well, my pen is growing atrophied from disuse. And with that, I thank you, my kind audience. As always, this has been Restless Readings. The audio drama created and maintained entirely by Rune Hernandez. Today's episode was featuring the stories It Was All a Lie by Reddit user Horror Queen 1212, and our featured classic story is Out of the Earth by Arthur Macon. Out of the Earth by Arthur Macon. I know there was a huge hiatus between this and the last episode. Trust me. I'll make sure that the next ones don't have that much time. It's just between everything getting really complicated really fast and also me getting sick. There was a lot of stuff to do. Anyway, if you enjoyed, you know what to do. If you don't want to deal with the Tome Keeper's wrath, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and more importantly, be wary of the children. Until the next time, bye.